It was just after midnight on September 22, 1979, when something impossible happened over the dark, icy waters between Antarctica and South Africa. Hundreds of miles above Earth, a U.S. surveillance satellite, Vela 6911, was silently orbiting, scanning the planet below for any signs of forbidden activity. Then, without warning, it detected something chilling. A distinctive double flash of light, a signature so specific and so recognizable that it could only mean one thing: a nuclear bomb had been detonated. But here's the problem. No country ever admitted to setting it off. The United States, United Kingdom, and Soviet Union had all signed the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty, making it illegal to test nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, underwater, or in outer space. And while a few countries had never signed the agreement, none had ever conducted such a bold, unannounced test. As news of the detection made its way through the U.S. military chain of command, the first reaction wasn't confusion, it was alarm. Who had just broken a major international treaty? And why? Was it an act of aggression, a warning, or something far more secretive? One thing was clear: a nuclear explosion had occurred, but the world's most powerful nations were silent, and maybe even complicit. The mystery had begun. To understand the significance of that eerie double flash, we need to go back to the Cold War era, a time when fear of nuclear war loomed over every global decision, and paranoia was as common as morning coffee. In 1963, after years of escalating nuclear tests and growing public outcry about radioactive fallout, the United States, United Kingdom, and Soviet Union signed the Partial Test Ban Treaty. This agreement prohibited nuclear explosions in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. But here's the thing: agreements only work if someone is watching. So, the U.S. launched a secretive satellite program named Vela. Between 1963 and 1970, 12 Vela satellites were sent into orbit. These weren't just passive observers. They were advanced, silent sentinels designed to catch cheaters, equipped with sensors that could detect the unique signals of nuclear detonations from thousands of miles away. Their job was simple: enforce the treaty by watching the planet 24/7 for any telltale signs of nuclear activity. And for over a decade, the Vela satellites did just that, until one of them, Vela 6911, recorded something it was never supposed to see. A double flash, a nuclear fingerprint, out in the middle of nowhere. The system had worked. The world had just witnessed what appeared to be an illegal nuclear test. But now came the harder part: figuring out who did it. On the early morning of September 22, 1979, at precisely 0:53 Universal Time Coordinated, Vela Satellite 6911 recorded an event that triggered immediate alarms at U.S. military installations. The satellite's optical sensors detected a brief, intense flash of light, followed milliseconds later by a second, longer-lasting burst. This sequence, known as a double flash, is the unmistakable signature of a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere. It's not something that can be confused with a lightning strike or a meteor. It's a calling card of atomic fire. Within minutes, data streamed into the Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. Specialists quickly analyzed the graph. The results were undeniable. 2 sharp humps of light, perfectly matching every previously confirmed nuclear test ever recorded by the Vela system. The room went still. They had seen this before, 41 times before, in fact. And every single time it had meant one thing: someone had just set off a nuclear bomb. But there was no notice, no declaration, no warnings. And most disturbingly, no one stepped forward to claim responsibility. What the satellite had witnessed wasn't just a technical anomaly. It was potentially a grave breach of international law, and perhaps the opening act of a geopolitical disaster. The question now wasn't just what had happened, but who had done it, and why. Of course, some experts hesitated to jump to conclusions. After all, satellites aren't perfect. Could the Vela 6911 satellite have simply made a mistake? Was it a technical fault, a stray meteorite strike, a lens flare, or even a cosmic ray? The skeptics raised these questions almost immediately, and in any other situation, they might have been valid. But the Vela satellites were not ordinary instruments. They were built with extreme precision and equipped with a unique piece of technology known as the bang meter. Yes, that's really what it was called. These bang meters weren't built to observe just anything. They were specifically designed to detect the optical signature of nuclear detonations. Their entire purpose was to sense that rapid double burst of light produced by a bomb. An initial flash from the explosion followed by a second from the resulting fireball as it cooled and expanded. It's a signal so rare and specific that almost nothing in nature can replicate it. During the lifetime of the Vela program, these satellites had detected 41 double flashes, and every one of them was a confirmed nuclear test. And here's more. Satellite 6911 didn't just record light. It also picked up gamma rays, X-rays, and neutron emissions, all of which spiked at the same moment. These aren't signals that a meteor or glitch can produce. The odds of this being a mistake? Minuscule. If the satellite said it saw a nuclear explosion, then it probably did. And yet, the mystery deepened. Because if this wasn't a glitch, someone had detonated a nuclear weapon in secret. But who? With the satellite data confirmed, the next step was to locate the blast. Using readings from other satellites, ground-based listening posts, and underwater seismic sensors, U.S. intelligence analysts began the process of triangulation. The result? They pinpointed the explosion to a remote area in the Indian Ocean, near the coordinates 47 degrees south, 40 degrees east. This placed the detonation in the frigid waters between the Crozet Islands, owned by France, and the Prince Edward Islands, controlled by South Africa. There were no known test ranges in the area. No warnings had been issued. No government claimed activity there. But the location provided the first big clue. President Jimmy Carter, who was in office at the time, quietly noted in his diary that the test might have been carried out from a ship, a mobile launch platform designed to avoid detection and plausible deniability. That theory narrowed the list of suspects. France had the capability and a history of atmospheric testing. South Africa had political tension and growing nuclear ambitions. Both had access to the region. But if this wasn't an accident or a natural event, then this was a deliberate violation of international law, one that could destabilize entire regions if discovered. So who had the means, motive, and madness to secretly detonate a nuclear device in one of the most remote oceans on Earth? We were about to find out. With the blast site narrowed to the lonely stretch of sea between Antarctica and southern Africa, the U.S. intelligence community began to focus on two potential suspects: France and South Africa. At first glance, France seemed like a likely candidate. They had conducted atmospheric nuclear tests in the past, particularly in the Pacific at Mururoa Atoll. But on closer inspection, France made less and less sense. By 1979, France had moved all its nuclear testing underground, well within its own legal test range. There was no need to conduct a test thousands of miles away, especially not in such a sensitive location. More importantly, France had always informed the US in advance about their tests, even when they didn't have to, and there was no French naval traffic observed near the blast site in the days leading up to the event. France, it seemed, could be ruled out. That left South Africa. Unlike France, South Africa had never officially tested a nuclear weapon, but rumors of its nuclear ambitions had been swirling for years. And crucially, U.S. satellites had observed South African ships operating in the area around the Prince Edward Islands in the days before the explosion. On its own, the presence of South African ships wasn't suspicious. Those waters were part of its territorial claims. But when combined with what was about to be uncovered, things started to look much more sinister. South Africa may have had more than just proximity. They may have had the motive, the opportunity, and most importantly, the technology. In 1979, South Africa was a nation on edge. Isolated internationally due to its brutal apartheid regime, the government in Pretoria was locked in a tense, low-intensity war in neighboring Angola, a conflict that had drawn in tens of thousands of Cuban troops, supported by the Soviet Union. For South Africa's leadership, the idea of Cuban-backed forces pushing south toward Namibia, then under South African control, was a nightmare. And with the global community turning its back on them, the regime began to look for a different kind of deterrent, a nuclear one. South Africa already had what many nations lacked: vast uranium reserves. By the mid-1970s, they were enriching it into yellow cake, the raw ingredient for a nuclear weapon. In 1977, the CIA caught South Africa digging a massive shaft in the Kalahari Desert, clearly designed for nuclear testing. The international response was swift. Under pressure from President Jimmy Carter, the operation was shut down before a test could take place. But the ambition didn't die. Without the ability to test legally or safely on land, South Africa may have turned to the Southern Ocean, a remote and lightly monitored region, to conduct a clandestine atmospheric detonation. But they weren't acting alone, because in the shadows, South Africa had a powerful partner, one with expertise in building bombs, but with secrets of its own to protect. That partner was Israel. While South Africa had the uranium, Israel had something just as valuable: nuclear expertise. Throughout the 1970s, Israel had quietly and deliberately pursued a nuclear deterrent. But unlike other nuclear powers, Israel adopted a policy of nuclear ambiguity. They neither confirmed nor denied possessing nuclear weapons. Publicly, it was all rumors. Privately, U.S. intelligence believed Israel already had fully functional nuclear warheads by the late 1970s. But how do you test such weapons without revealing your secret? You don't. At least not alone. And that's where the Israel-South Africa alliance comes in. Both nations were international outcasts at the time. South Africa for its apartheid regime, Israel for its hostile relations with many of its neighbors. Behind the scenes, the two had quietly forged a powerful military and scientific partnership. Documents declassified decades later revealed that in 1975, Israel and South Africa had signed a highly classified agreement, codenamed SAMENT. It laid the groundwork for joint military cooperation, including, disturbingly, the exchange of nuclear weapons and knowledge. Israel needed uranium. South Africa needed technology. Together, they had the perfect ingredients for building and testing a bomb. And South Africa had the perfect location: the Prince Edward Islands, remote and barely monitored. If Israel wanted to test its bomb, and South Africa wanted to benefit from the data, a joint atmospheric test far from any political spotlight may have been the ideal solution. All signs pointed to a covert operation, one with global consequences if it ever came to light. And soon, someone would reveal its secret name. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but then came the boldest claim of all from someone who would know. In 1994, a man named Commodore Dieter Gerhardt was released from prison in South Africa. He wasn't just any man. He was a convicted Soviet spy and the former commander of the Simon's Town Naval Base, South Africa's main naval headquarters during the time of the 1979 incident. Upon his release, Gerhardt made a stunning allegation. He claimed that the mysterious double flash detected by the Vela satellite wasn't just a random test or an accident. According to him, it was a joint Israeli-South African nuclear test, codenamed Operation Phoenix. Gerhardt said, "Although I was not directly involved in planning or carrying out the operation, I learned unofficially that the flash was produced by an Israeli-South African test named Operation Phoenix. The explosion was clean and was not supposed to be detected, but the weather changed and the Americans were able to pick it up. If true, this was explosive information, both figuratively and literally. And there was more. During the exact time frame of the explosion, between September 17th and 23rd, South Africa's Simon's Town Harbor and Naval Base was suddenly closed to the public. Their naval rescue unit was also placed on high alert, without explanation. Coincidence? Maybe. But all signs were now pointing to a highly organized, top-secret nuclear test. One carried out in the shadows, in partnership between two governments desperate to stay under the radar. But if this was true, why didn't the world know? Why wasn't there an international outcry? The answer: America didn't want one. Back in Washington, President Jimmy Carter faced a geopolitical dilemma. If the U.S. publicly acknowledged that South Africa and Israel had conducted a secret nuclear test, it could have destabilized alliances, fueled arms races, and forced America to confront the illegal actions of two of its strategic partners. So instead of launching a global investigation to identify the culprits, the Carter administration took a different route. They formed a scientific panel known as the Runu Panel, named after its chair, MIT engineer Jack Ruina. But this panel had a strange and suspicious restriction. It wasn't tasked with finding who did it. In fact, it wasn't even tasked with confirming whether it was a nuclear explosion. Its only job? To explore whether the event could have been caused by a natural phenomenon. And as if that weren't enough, the panel was barred from reviewing any classified intelligence that might point to a specific country. They weren't given access to satellite tracking data, Navy recordings, or even the CIA's own reports. Despite all these being crucial to the case, the panel operated partially blind. Unsurprisingly, their final report, released in 1980, concluded that the double flash was probably not a nuclear explosion. Instead, they suggested it could have been caused by a micrometeorite hitting the satellite or some other obscure technical anomaly. Never mind the gamma rays, neutron readings, and trace radioactive iodine found in the atmosphere afterward. Never mind the satellite's perfect track record or the suspicious naval activity in the region. The official conclusion was simple: nothing to see here. But for many, that conclusion wasn't just weak, it was intentional. The truth, it seemed, was being buried. Despite the RUNU panel's official conclusion, serious doubts lingered. Too many things didn't add up. For starters, the Vela 6911 satellite wasn't just fooled by a flash of light. It recorded gamma rays, X-rays, and neutrons, radiation patterns consistent only with a nuclear detonation. Atmospheric sampling in the days following the event revealed traces of iodine-131, a radioactive isotope typically produced in nuclear explosions. Then there were the hydroacoustic recordings, underwater microphones maintained secretly by the U.S. Navy. These sensors picked up low-frequency sound waves consistent with a subsurface nuclear blast, near the same coordinates where the satellite had seen the flash. But none of this evidence was included in the RUNU panel's review. It was deliberately withheld. Why? Because pointing fingers at Israel or South Africa would have been politically catastrophic. Both nations were, despite their flaws, critical allies of the United States. Israel, a vital military partner in the Middle East. South Africa, a uranium supplier and a Cold War chess piece on the African continent. Admitting that either had violated international treaties could have triggered diplomatic breakdowns, arms sanctions, or worse, public scrutiny of America's own involvement. And so, the truth was carefully locked away. Crucial CIA reports remain classified to this day. Many documents that might reveal what really happened are either buried under decades of national security red tape or conveniently missing. To this day, the 1979 Vela incident remains one of the most heavily redacted and politically sensitive cases of the Cold War. An incident not forgotten but intentionally unresolved. More than 4 decades have passed since the Vela satellite captured that chilling double flash over the Indian Ocean. Yet the world still doesn't officially know who pulled the nuclear trigger that day. Was it a technical malfunction? An unlucky micrometeorite? Or was it something far more deliberate? A covert test conducted by South Africa and Israel, carefully hidden beneath layers of secrecy and geopolitical convenience? The official record says the cause was inconclusive, but the evidence, when taken together, paints a far more unsettling picture. From the precise signature of the explosion, to the radioactive residue in the atmosphere, to the restricted access to naval facilities, to the declassified agreements between nations, the pieces of the puzzle seem to fit. And yet, the final picture remains classified. The U.S. had every reason to look the other way. After all, geopolitics is rarely about truth. It's about alliances, power, and plausible deniability. In the end, the 1979 Vela incident remains an unsolved Cold War mystery, an event that officially never happened, even though we know it probably did. It's a story about secrets hidden in plain sight, and a sobering reminder that, in the world of nuclear politics, sometimes the biggest explosions leave behind no crater, only silence.